Anahid, and in March of 1928, Christine Kahn's 9-year-old son Walter went missing. Immediately, Kahn contacted the LAPD in hopes that they would find her son. 5 months later, the LAPD returned Kahn the boy who claimed he was Walter. But soon after, it became clear that the Walter that was imposing to be Walter wasn't him in fact. The LAPD refused to work on the case anymore until a few months later it became known that Walter had been a part of the wine mill chicken murders. Gordon Stewart Northcott had brutally murdered at least 4 children on his chicken farm, one of which had been Walter Collins. His family admitted to his wrongdoing, and he was later sentenced to the death penalty. This tragic story, if it sounds familiar, is from the movie The Changeling. This is just one of thousands of stories about a murder, and one of few that ended in justice. Many people around the world have been innocently murdered, and is it just that they get away with murder so easily? My main proposition tonight is that sentencing those who have committed a murder to the death penalty is beneficial to the United States. To defend my claim, I will use 3 secondary claims. The first, saying that by sentencing murderers to the death penalty will make the world safer. The second, that the death penalty is equal and fair punishment for murder. And the third, that more than likely crime rates will decrease because of the death penalty. So my first claim defending my proposition was that the world will be a safer place. By giving one time in jail, you're almost opening up a door to you're opening up the option for a second chance. Second chances are fine for smaller crimes and misdemeanors. However, we're dealing with human life. When putting a murderer in prison, even if it is for their whole life, the murderer may somehow defy the odds and find a way to escape, or even have his time in prison cut. Another example lies in the case of gang members who would easily order the death of another human being if needed. Therefore, the death penalty will ensure that the murderer will never again take the life of another human being. John McAdams of Marquette University once said, "If we execute murderers and there is no deterrent effect, we have killed a bunch of murderers. If we fail to execute murderers, and doing so would in fact have deterred other murderers, we have allowed the killing of a bunch of innocent victims. I would much rather risk the former." As a result, by removing murderers from our world today and completely ending the opportunity for them to commit another murder, the world will be a much safer place. My second supporting claim regards the idea of equal and fair punishment. In Hammurabi's code established years ago, it says that if a man put out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out. In other words, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and a life for a life. The punishment one faces should be equivalent to the crime that they have committed. Therefore, the equal to murder would in fact be death. Imagine that someone you loved was murdered. How fair is it that the killer just walks away with a few years in prison? Justice should be seen in every case, and in doing so, the U.S. will be a much safer place for all of the people making their lives here. My third and final supporting claim is that by using the death penalty as a punishment for murderers, crime rates will most likely decrease and therefore benefit our country. Knowing that the consequences of their actions may lead to their own death will make criminals think twice before attempting murder. If you give them other options, they are more likely to think positively about their future and go through with their crime. George Pataki, who was a former governor of New York State, for too long, coddling of criminals allowed unacceptable levels of violence to permeate the streets. For more than 2 decades, New York was without the death penalty. During this time, fear of crime was compounded by the fact that too often it largely went unpunished. No more. In New York, the death penalty has turned the tables on fear and put it back where it belongs, in the hearts of criminals. Within just 1 year, the death penalty helped produce a dramatic drop in violent crime. Just as important, it has restored New Yorkers' confidence in the justice system because they know that their government genuinely is committed to their safety. In another article written in the New York Times, journalist Adam Liptak writes that according to roughly a dozen studies, execution saves lives. For each inmate put to death, the studies say 3 to 18 murders are prevented. Therefore, by using the death penalty to decrease crime rates, the U.S. will be a much safer place to live. Today, I have talked to you about my proposition regarding the death penalty, and I've given you 3 adequate reasons as to why it should be accepted. First, I mentioned that the death penalty will make the world a safer place. Second, punishments should be fair and equal to the crime committed. Third, the crime rates will decrease if criminals knew the death penalty was used as a punishment. That is why I would like you to agree with me that sentencing those who have committed a murder to the death penalty is beneficial to the United States. Thank you.
All right, I think the changeling story goes on a little long and you need to get to your point quicker. It's about 1.5 minutes before you finally get to the proposition. Once you do get there, you do have a very clear statement of what the proposition is and a very good layout of the supporting structure. The second point in your argument, though, is all value argument, and so it's really not appropriate for this particular assignment. The first and the third points, I think they're very reminiscent of one another. They're both arguing for relative safety and improvement in violence levels in society. There might be some other way to organize them so that they would be a little bit more distinct. Your citation of evidence on that first point I thought was a little underwhelming. It's primarily about the criteria about what would be a just punishment. On the third point, you did a little bit more citation of information. You've got the testimony of the governor and his opinion about how it's enhanced the state of New York. You've got some statistical information suggesting that there is some way to measure the deterrent effect. So I think that you need more of that kind of information on that first and third point. The hypothetical about somebody maybe escaping or maybe hurting somebody in prison, I think there's a good argument to be made there. And the argument about gangs in prison perhaps being able to carry out murders, I'm not sure how the death penalty would ultimately prevent that unless it was carried out immediately upon sentencing, for instance, which is a different kind of argument. So I think that the third point is the one that you had the strongest support on. The second point is a value claim, and it really doesn't fit in with the argument that we're dealing with here on the claim of fact. And the first point needs to be a little bit more distinct from the third point, and the support for it needs to be more thorough in general safety as opposed to the criteria as to what is appropriate or inappropriate. All right, thank you.